Hey, thank you for coming back. Great to have you again. Today, on the crux, where it matters, right? Where the intersection point is, we talk about the symptoms. We bring those out of the air, the thought bubbles, all the news stories around the world, but we're going to talk about the source of things. And so today on the crux with Paul Stone, which I'm very grateful you're here again, and I'm very grateful I'm here. We're going to talk about an article that came out recently, and the timeliness of it really doesn't matter. It's a great example of something that's constant, and it's this shaming stuff. I can tell you this, if you shame me, my natural inclination inside me, how I'm wired without doing any work, which I've done a lot of, maybe not enough, but a lot of over the last, 20 years, every week. I'm going to want to shame you. I'm definitely not going to give you what you want. You use that approach with me, shaming me, you're not going to get what you want. There's an old saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So the man or woman might acquiesce and temporarily tell you what you want to hear so they get you to stop bothering them, harassing them, pressuring them, guilting them, shaming them. And then they're just going to go back to what they were already believing before you brought your approach on them. And that's what, the other thing I want to talk about today, it's the approach. So there's a group of comedians that were going to Saudi Arabia to put on a comedy bit for the Crown Prince. And Chappelle and Chris Hart headlining the show. And there's these articles that are shaming them, calling them whored out, that they whored themselves out. So let's use this common phrase, unpack this. So let's unpack that they hoard themselves out. They have talents, like an athlete would have talents, and they make money from putting them to work. So they need to be on a stage in front of people, charge money for that, sell tickets, ratings, reviews, and they're in Saudi Arabia. Now, obviously, lots of the 9/11 terrorists. We have recently seen on Netflix, I believe it was, Rumble, a documentary that someone worked on for many, many years, talking about how maybe that was all a big rigged thing, 9/11, engineered by our own government. But if we just look at the nationality of the supposed terrorists, many of them are in jail or dead, they were from Saudi Arabia. So Cuba's a communist country. They've had an embargo put against them for 60 years, 50, 60, 40 years, a long time. Long time, right? How's that worked? Did that government change from communism to democracy? Did it cry uncle yet? So now, so twofold. Our approach, or the media's approach, or whoever writes for the media, or maybe a lot of you, or maybe a lot of people think the approach to get Saudi Arabia to change how it is, humanitarian on a humanitarian basis for its own people, other people, harsh maybe treatment in the religion that prevails in their country against women. I get it. We don't agree with that. That's why we're here. They get to be there. They're people. They're entitled to some comedy. You imagine how much they're suffering, and then their crown prince decides to bring some, sinful Americans over for a night of raucous laughter and haughtiness. I mean, I think it would be so sad if the camera was on the crowd and they weren't allowed to laugh at certain jokes, right? Like maybe, how our comedians can get. They can get obnoxious. We find that, depending on who's saying stuff, revolting. But when a comedian says it, it's funny. And what I love about comedy is, and occasionally I'm funny, randomly funny, but it causes an involuntary reaction inside of me. It's like I can't control it. And, the savvy of the delivery and the timing and where they accent words and where they, leave, or they insert the pause, where it causes us to go, and just all that stuff. Of course, what they're saying and how they're saying it causes an involuntary reaction inside of me. And I burst out laughing. I think that's a pretty powerful effect you can have on people. But So if they were in any state in this country, then Chappelle and Chris Hart wouldn't be whored out. But they're in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I mean, I get if they were doing this for Hitler, you'd say, oh, they whored themselves out. So where is it that they don't get to do what they do for a living, saving, earning money, celebrating what they're great at, having people clapping and laughing in the state, in the audience. So you have an expectation on these comedians to know what you want and go by what you think is right, so they don't get to be free. Maybe you're not free. Maybe that's where it starts. Remember, we're going to talk about the symptoms, but we're going to draw that back to the source of things. And so maybe you're not free and you're envious that they are, and then you found this little point of contention that you get to pick with them, and you get to label them that they've whored themselves out for serving up their talents to a regime, government you don't agree with. But most of the people, hopefully anyway, that are sitting in that audience are just regular old Saudi Arabian citizens out for a good laugh for a couple hours. Could you imagine how free, if you don't agree with the Saudi Arabian government, the regime, man, I guess you wouldn't think their people are free. And I've heard horror stories. But so in that flawed thinking, where we're going to shame them in the media, that you're going to get them to change? Are they? This is after the event. So, are there latest updated stories that they just turned their jets around and flew back to America? They read your complaints in the media. Now, I'm probably talking to a lot of people that might agree with what I'm saying, and I'm hoping I'm talking to people who don't. I'm hoping I'm reaching some of you too, because we're all brothers and sisters, right? We're all on this planet. We're all wandering. None of us came with an instruction manual. Your parents didn't on how to raise you, me. I didn't get that instruction manual raising my kids. We don't get the instruction manual. It's like, well, should I invent an app or go to college? Should I stay in the band? It's been 6 years. I'm 28 now. So I stay in the band. Are we going to make it next year? Or do I quit and get that accounting degree? Like, we don't have that instruction manual. What we have are principles. Ton of life's always going to be mysteries, right? It's always going to be unknown. It doesn't have to be uncertainty, but it can be how it goes, how it turns out. That can be an unknown. A lot of it's going to be an unknown. But if we apply a code, all of your favorite video games, what are they made of? Code. Does the code bend? Have you ever found a game where you can just like shoot a hole in the wall and then it leads to like an entirely secret map? But if it did, then the coders would have had to put that there. They would have had to put that code in there, and then maybe once in a while, one out of a million players just happens to be in a living room of some house in the map, and they just start shooting up some picture, and boom, a little portal opens up and they're in some part of the game that no one even knows about. But the coders would have had to put it there. And the reason I'm making this point is that there's a code to this country. There's a code to the Constitution. There's a code to living. There's a code to being a human. And there's a code on how things change and how they don't. And nothing is going to change by shaming. And if you're being shamed and that's what you're passing on, because there is something we want to highlight here called transference. Oh, someone cuts you off in traffic. And 15 minutes later, you're screaming at the checkout person because they're gabbing away with the person in front of you and you're in a hurry. And just how ridiculous is that they should be enjoying their time with whoever's in front of you, inconveniencing you. That used to bother me. I've lived it. I'm talking from experience. We complain about, the shootings in this country. We complain about the politicians, complain about the failed leadership. Where is shame? Are we applying shame like an embargo? Maybe you're just not getting what you want. And you're just out of options. You're so distracted, you're not recognizing that that's just not going to work. Those are, whatever their lives are, Chappelle and Chris Hurt and all the others, whatever their lives are, their mistakes, their flaws, they're just human. What if we were happy that the Saudi Arabian citizenry, 1,000 people, whatever, however many people were in the audience that night, or however many nights, Saudi Arabia's trying to kick off this thing, this 2030 vision, where they're altering their economy. They're eventually going to run out of the oil. I think half of it's gone. They need to have other ways of generating revenue. So that's a good thing for the people that live there. I'm not sure that it's an equal split on the oil revenue down to the common man and woman. I don't want to pick a fight, but I think there's over 1,000 princes now. Are they really? Is that how could a family be that big? How could it actually be that big? Anyway, that's a lot of relatives. And, from what I understand, and I've seen some movies like Syriana, I'll never forget that Matt Damon line. He's just waiting to figure out how the Saudi Arabian person he's working with is going to waste another $50 million today. I mean, they're drowning in capital. Is that getting to the people? It kind of sucks if it's not. I've been over there when I was in the military. I watched from the top of Khobar Towers, which got hit a couple months after I left back in, 94, 95, somewhere in there. I was on the 7th floor of the building. We'd go up there and hang out because we were bored to death if we weren't flying around in the theater. And all of a sudden you just saw people streaming in from all different parts of the town, that you could see them coming out from behind the buildings and the streets. And then you could just see a few hundred people, maybe, 1,000. And they all converged. And one of the guys I was with in the building had a pair of binoculars. And we ran down and sent someone down and got him. He came up to the roof and we were looking and they cut off someone's hand. So there's some justice. That's an old part of the world. We're going to change that by shaming our comedians? Why would we do that to our own people? Would you want that done to you? Would that cause you to change how you're behaving? Choices you're making? I guarantee you're being shamed in one way or another from some powers in your life, and that doesn't feel good. So we got to, consider doing the opposite. And I don't mean to lecture, but I've lived all the wrong ways. I've spent a lot of my time on the planet not too happy to be here. I was completely lost for a few decades. I mean, I've lived wrong and made poor choices out of being impatient and reactionary and emotional. And I still do occasionally. I didn't walk on water to my studio today. None of you did. So we're not getting what we want. So we lash out at other people. Again, the suffering Saudi Arabians to have a night of comedy and understand that maybe they should throw a little revolution in their own country to kind of have what we want, or for them to raise up their own Chris Hertz and Tuckers and Chappelle's. Look at how we are. David Chappelle's made some bad choices in his life from what I understand. And he's had some challenges and we've forgiven him. We'll still buy a ticket and go see him when he's on stage here at any city in America. And we wouldn't think, and check this out. It doesn't come to us that the first choice that pops into many of our heads is not to be happy for the Saudis. They get to get a little comedy, a little craziness. Stuff that probably is half of what they would say is illegal over there. I mean, alcohol's illegal there. It's illegal. What was funny is when we were there and flying stuff around in the theater after the war, years after, the British and the Australians were able to have booze in their barracks, but we couldn't. I guess they just had better negotiators. Maybe we should send the British in and let them lead the peace process discussions over there in Gaza and Israel and all that. Maybe they're better negotiators because alcohol is illegal in Saudi Arabia. I think you can use it for medical applications, but illegal. We used to go to Bahrain to get our drink on once in a while, not too often. It was funny though, coming back, I threw up on a security guard last time I was there, a checkpoint. So if America's like, a shot at some kind of happiness and freedom and portability, and we can move around and go from state to state and print whatever we want, mostly, a lot of people have lost their careers over saying stupid stuff, and may not even been that stupid. Might have just been that a lot of people didn't agree with it. Maybe become too reactionary. We can't just let people be people. We got to set that example first. We look at the other countries. We look at the idea our government sets, that it sets an embargo against Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Cuba. Have these countries changed? There's got to be another way. So this is a short bit today. Just kind of how many times, how much longer down this road of misery are we going to continue to apply the same failing approaches that only show me that we've lost the tether to our humanity, to actually what it's like to be a human being that makes mistakes and is flawed, but naturally seems drawn to things that make it happy, certainly wants to accomplish the things and have those things in its life that give it peace of mind. We're shaming comedians now? You think that's going to be effective? How are they going to, what do you think? Like, it probably bothers them. And they come back to the States and they're like, how could you? That stupid question, how could you? Well, they made, in your opinion, they made a mistake. But what they were actually just doing is they were just in flow. It could probably feel special to have the crown prince of a country call you up and get you booked and have you, come over to some new stadium they probably just built. Let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate that, oh my God, would Saudi Arabia had them over there 10 years ago? And maybe it's economically driven that, they had a lot more oil 10, 20 years ago. And now they can see eventually we'll be at the bottom of the barrel. What are we going to do? We're going to need tourism. We're going to need some things that entertain people, like a Disneyland concept. Dubai is on fire from what I understand. It's over there in the middle of a desert like Vegas is, right? It's a lot closer to a big part of the world than Vegas is. Vegas is obviously close to people in America, Canada, Mexico. But Europe's got to take a long trip. What is that, 9 hours to get to Las Vegas? So it's natural for people to want to invent, celebrate something new, be amongst each other, laugh. I mean, my God, laughter that's got to be one of the oldest traits, comes right along with crying, in humanity. It doesn't cost not really too much to just laugh at something, laugh at ourselves. Man, in the wake of the Charlie Kirk stuff, in the wake of, presidential elections swinging from one extreme to the other, in the wake of all the shootings, in the wake of all your misery, how your earnings don't overcome your bills, how the youth don't see them owning a home, but they obviously grew up in one their parents own most of the time. And let's think about all the ones that grow up in a household with one parent, because there's a lot of those. We talked a few weeks ago about 10, 20 million kids are below the poverty level, and another 10 or 20 are just barely above it. We got work to do, and the work that the media and people that shoot off shaming people, that isn't work. That is ineffective. That is antithetical to progress. That is not celebrating what the human is made of. That is not in alignment with how it actually goes. And you got to recognize that if the results that you're hoping for don't materialize from the efforts that you're putting forward, then we got to change our game. Guess what that requires? Humility, some humbleness. And guess what that usually needs to have happen, to take place? We got to slow down. We got it. So I know, there's an old saying, I used to drink a lot. So I didn't go to jail every time I was drunk. The few times I found myself there, I was. So I didn't go to jail every time I was drunk, is the old saying. But the times that I found myself there, I was. So if we're looking at, we're taking a humble approach, we can't be impatient. Like these mistakes that I made in my life, most of the time when I look back at them, the ones I made yesterday, I was impatient. I was going too fast. I was trying to get out of pain, or I was trying to end a pain, or I was trying to prevent one from forming. And it ended up causing, I didn't think it through because I was reacting instead of responding. And I know this sounds a little bit like a therapy session. I've been through a lot of that. There's a lot of people that need it today. Thank God there's more therapists out there to deliver on that today. There's a lot of stuff we can be grateful for. We're going to take ownership for ourselves. Why are we blasting some comedians for traveling across to the Middle East to put on a comedy show in front of a country that most of you probably never been to? You find any pen pals in Saudi Arabia that you're writing back and forth expressing empathy for their misery? No. You're just going to shame our comedians. That's enough. There's enough of that. You're better than that. You can obviously see that's not going to work. This is just a great example. The whole show isn't about the comedians that went over there. It's to say, look at that template. Is that a template that leads to success? Were you taught that in business school? Is this the way when people were going to become reporters and writers and journalists, that when you were in college, this is what they told you is a really crafty ethic to get to wag the dog? No, it's not. So let's stop doing it. Let's take stock and ownership of our individuality. Let's look at how we can do a better job. And let's certainly look at what we actually need to work on and that life is happening where our feet are. And let's do what we can to improve that life. Let's do that. That's my suggestion. Maybe that's a thought for the week. Let's look at where our feet are. I'm present. I'm trying to carry a message to be useful to others. I'm absolutely focused on this camera lens, and I'm talking to you and hoping that my experience has value to you. I'm not saying anything. There's no shame here. There's just taking a glance at, do we think that's going to actually change anything in anybody's life for the positive? Thank you for watching.